Hello. All right. Well, welcome to the next session, which is strategic objectives and priorities for mining in Saudi Arabia. And we have a great panel this afternoon. I'm very pleased to welcome His Excellency, the Vice Minister for Industry Affairs, Osama Al-Zamil. Next to me, my friend Klaus Kleinfeld, the former CEO of Siemens and Alcoa. Tom Harley from Australia, who's the chair of the Australia-Saudi Arabia Business Council. Khalid Al-Modi, who's the CEO of Saudi Red Bricks. So it's a very, I think, interesting and diverse panel we put together, looking at the strategic objectives and priorities for mining in the kingdom. If I can just kick off and just make some very brief opening remarks, and they're really this, and it's a very fairly simple and maybe slightly trite proposition, and that is mining is a very high-risk, capital-intensive industry with very long lead times between exploration and production. So it's absolutely essential for any mining project that the project is de-risked as much as possible, and to make that effective and workable, mining companies and investors need to have effectively complete predictability and security of tenure. And as suggested in the last panel, one of the ways of achieving that is to have a mining code which is objective, which has strict time limits, that has an effective licensing system through a cadastral system, that investors are able to repatriate their profits and their capital, that the fiscal regime is fair and equitable, that it gives effect to principles of sustainability and responsible supply chains in an ESG era, and there's automatic access to international arbitration. So I'm going to kick off my first question and ask His Excellency, the Vice Minister, what he sees as the strategic objectives and priorities for mining in the kingdom as we stand here at the beginning of 2023. Welcome, Vice Minister.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be here with my elite panelists. Actually, I'm delighted to be here. Actually, to start with, I will look at the way that how we can have our alignment of manufacturing strategic objectives and priorities from mining in Saudi Arabia in two ways, in my point of view. First, mineral resources are are integrated part of the Ministry of Industrial and Mineral Resources ecosystem. Actually, this is a wise decision made by the central government to combine the two manufacturing, the industrial sector and the mining sector in one industry, in one ministry, which gives a clear message from the government that we need to maximize the value chain creation from the mining industry that will contribute, will exploit the potential of 1.3 trillion US dollar of reserves that will contribute to the global supply chain. Actually, this will all go to manufacturing product for export and for local consumption. This also will help us as getting more sectors developed in the National Industrial Strategy, which has 12 sectors. Both, we have two of them in the mining and mineral industry, which is such as the building material, for example. Actually, the second part of that, this point of managing that objective is that mineral resources as a raw material to many manufacturing opportunities from basic to intermediate and finally downstream application. Actually, this will quadruple the mining sector contribution to the KSA GDP by 2035. If we can also refer to the national mining strategy, it says that we are going to contribute in the mining industry 58 billion US dollar for mining projects that coming from the national mining industry. 65% of that 85 billion US dollar will go to a downstream and intermediate manufacturing opportunities. In fact, will be offered to investors as part of strategic sectors implementation of national industrial strategy. Consider mining industry as third pillar, contributing to the development of industrial sector opportunities after oil and gas and petrochemical.
Thank you very much. I'm going to, and I didn't mention him when I opened my remarks, I'm going to jump on to the speaker I didn't announce, and that is Ahmed Al-Obeishi, the Vice President of Planning Digital Development at ESNAD. Why I'm doing that is because when we spoke about this yesterday, Ahmed, you mentioned an innovation which I don't think many people are aware of, how the licensing system is actually working in Saudi Arabia. The government have actually set up effectively an independent company or agency to process all the licenses and engage with investors. And I think that's a very interesting innovation. So perhaps you could talk about that.
Thank you, Peter. Even if you did not introduce me, I'm going to talk about it. First of all, a brief about the Saudi Mining Service Company. During the past few years, we knew that the government haven't put enough effort for really developing the mining sector in Saudi Arabia. And with Vision 2030 and the mining strategy, we realized that there are big untapped opportunity for the mining. To develop this sector and enrich the experience, one of these entities established by a royal decree is to establish the Saudi Mining Service Company as an executive arm for the ministry. Why exactly? To help the ministry from the operation perspective, execution perspective, using emerging technology perspective about processing the license, the inspections, promoting the investors, and enrich the investor experience in the right way. So as an example, today, we have issued in 2020, we have issued more than 214 exploration licenses, and that have been issued in 2020. And actually, today is the 11th of January, and we have issued so far 20 exploration licenses, more than 50% of them for international companies.
How quickly do you do that?
It depends on the investor, how they comply to the requirements in the right way. If they are comply to the right requirements, and this is our job also to increase their maturity and awareness of our requirements. And if they are adapt to our requirements in the right way, maximum 60 days for an exploration license, if the location is available. But for the other requirements from a sustainability perspective, a work plan perspective, if the investor is preparing all these documents in the right way, it's a maximum of 60 days. It depends on the availability of the locations.
And perhaps you could just describe, how the company operates, what sort of people you have working there, and so on.
Definitely. One of the main objectives of ESNAD, the Saudi Mining Service Company, to be a private sector company owned by the government, by the ministry itself. Even that, the chairman of the company is the minister, and the vice minister is the vice chairman. The goal of that is to attract the right talents, the right capabilities, the right technologies to help the mining sector in different aspects. Not only from the regulation perspective or from the governance perspectives, but also to help the companies and the investors themselves from adopting the new technologies.
Thanks very much. So if I can move away from that and I'll come to Tom Harley. Tom, perhaps you could give some comments on mining from an international investor's perspective and how you see things playing out here.
Thank you very much, Peter. I'll just tell you a bit about my background, because that may tell you why I'm so confident in some of what I'm going to say. I worked for BHP for over 20 years, and my last job I was in charge of the corporate development. It's overseas growth strategy and risk analysis. And for the last 15 years, we set up a company called Dragoman, which advises companies on how to enter new countries and how to work in difficult countries. I want to make two observations. One, which is a set of generic observations about the mining industry today, and secondly, to talk about the competitive nature of the current situation. The challenge of the electrification of the world has been one of the largest changes to the structure of the mining industry in my lifetime. And how does that manifest itself? Well, first of all, in acute skill shortages in a sector where there has been very little or sustained investment in training people, or underinvestment over many years. Secondly, the mineral exploration portfolios have been completely reprioritized with different emphasis on different minerals, and in many cases that further exacerbating skill shortages. Third, processing technologies and downstream value-add requirements are being demanded quite correctly by governments, as His Excellency pointed out. In many countries, it is a demand and it's a price of investing and getting access to a resource. I'm pleased to say in the Kingdom, it is a much more sophisticated linkage of the development of the mining sector to the development of an industry strategy. And lastly, there's a global challenge which is beset us all, and that's the requirements and the vulnerabilities of sophisticated supply chains, with politics being a huge impact in the design of supply chains. So if things weren't difficult enough, we've got that. My second set of... Sorry?
I was going to just ask you about that. Where do you see that headed? What's your view on that?
I see it becoming more exacerbated. I think that, to put it in, and Klaus may relate to this, I think that we are at the end of the Davos era of freer trade, and we're going to have a much more segmented set of supply chains based around alliances, and some of it's reactive and some of it will be positive.
The end of the Washington Consensus.
Yes, well, I don't think Washington, I'll credit Davos. The second thing I want to talk about is this industry is a highly competitive industry where countries compete with each other. And I think that with the overlay of the challenge of electrification, that competition is becoming brutal. And what are the points that people look for? First of all, countries, of course, determine the fiscal terms. They determine the licenses. The whole structure of the industry is in the gift of government. And so dealing with governments that understand what they're doing and are strategic and are capable of following through on things is highly significant. And I think the Kingdom scores very highly on that. Secondly, there's the quality of the data of geology and how much of the country has been explored. The third is the certainty of contracts, and that's come up several times this afternoon. The protection of the rights and the protection of the rights of investors. And lastly, there is investment, and the Kingdom is the most imaginative in this, in providing capacity for new entrants to de-risk their entry. And that's one of the critical distinguishing features. Now, I'd like to end on one note. I've been coming to the Kingdom for 15 years. I've advised many companies here. One thing that I note about this Kingdom is it is highly ambitious for itself. And it's an ambition that in my time in coming here has been matched by its achievement of those ambitions.
Thank you very much, Tom. So, Khalid, I'm coming to you now to give a Saudi business perspective on what you think the issues are, what you think the Kingdom offers investors, how things could be improved, and what you think the next steps are that need to be taken by government and business to make the industry even more of a success.
Peter, first, thank you. And of course, thanks to our Excellency, Deputy Minister Zamil. I'm here to speak on behalf of an investors. We are local investors, but of course, we are most aware of the international investors as well. An investor needs peace and needs a clear way to know where he's going, a direct way that he knows at the end of the day he's going to succeed. Saudi Arabia can give all of that and more. I've shown in the past 5 to 6 years is a total different than what we had before. It's really, I've been through this for the last 44 years, dealing with all the ministries in this country, and I can tell you for a fact that in the last 5, 6 years, it has changed. And the last 1 year here, after implementing most of the laws that has been come down, I think we are in a great hands. We are in a great success. I would like to add, being a citizen of Saudi Arabia and an investor, and talking on behalf of some of the investors, especially the middle class or the upper middle class. Of course, we talked, Peter, about the one-stop station. This is the most important thing for a guy that is coming from Canada, from South Africa, from many of the other nations that he wants to do business. He is good in mining. He doesn't know all the details that have to be done. You have to clear it. You have to iron it out for him and tell him, here it is, go and get to work. Put your money, bring your know-how. If SIDF is going to give an equal share for as a loan, as 50%, that's entirely up to the government in that case. But definitely, we are new in this business, but the world is not new in this business. We talked about that. So what has been done, we can elaborate, and it's good that we are right now at this stage where the technology has transferred and the know-how is much more advanced, and picking out raw material is much cheaper and much more clear than before, and you can get even the raw materials that cannot be able to get. Now, I have 4 points which I talked about, which is the one-stop station. That's very important. The train railroad system have to be much more eager and much more pushed through. We need to, instead of making one line, let's make 5, 6 lines. Time is of essence. And these companies that today have an interest with us, they might have an interest with somebody else's if we don't push further and further. Water. Water, yes, we are not a river country. We don't have lots of rivers, but we have desalination plants that produce water at the end that then it goes through a sewage system, and that water, some of it is dumped. We can take advantage of this water and sweeten the deals for these companies and say, come, we can give you water, and this water is much more clear than even the river waters. Last but not least, energy, gas. We have lots of gas. We can take advantage of it, clean gas, clean energy, and also some of the environmental clean energy, whether it's wind or the sun. That's my hope. I would love to see this happen in the next 3 to 5 years. We need to push. We have a lot of young people that needs to work, and going downstream is the success of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Klaus, I'm going to come to you, if I can.
Okay. Yes, so having been an industrialist for basically all of my life, 20 plus years running different types of business at Siemens and then running it in total. And then 10 years with Alcoa, running Alcoa, forming the partnership with Marden here, and very proud having built up the aluminum system here in the kingdom together with Marden, and a system that is so integrated that doesn't exist anywhere on this planet. So let me make a few remarks. One is, in any business, you need to look for competitive advantage, a sustainable competitive advantage. In the commodity business, as Peter, you mentioned it, it's a risky business and it has its ups and downs, but you still have to understand what are the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are not difficult. You first have to look at 3 filters. You have to look at the first filter. Do I have geological endowment? Is there something there? You know, that's the first thing. Secondly, do I have factor cost advantages outside of the geological thing? And thirdly, do I have in my larger region access to large demand? So in reality, do I bring down, you know, the transportation costs? You know, so those 3 things. That's it. You know, those are the three lenses. That's it. You know, and you apply them to every mineral on this planet, and then you find out, do I get competitive advantages? You know, sustainable competitive advantages. So the good news is, you know, this work in part has been done here in the kingdom, and there are very, very encouraging answers to it. And one I know very well on the aluminum side, that's why we came here. That's why we put $11 billion into the ground. And the attraction was exactly that. We have a bauxite mine, you know, and we had a railway, by the way, that enabled it. Alcoa turned the project down about 30 years ago because there was no way to get the bauxite to the water, you know. So a really, really good point. So there's bauxite there, you know, then we could turn the bauxite into alumina because we got gas and heat. And then we can turn the alumina into aluminum because we got electricity. So we built the large power plant there. But there are other areas where the kingdom is not as advanced, you know, and it's in copper, it's in zinc, it's in ceramics, think of that, and it's in glass, you know. So there are a number of things where all the three lenses work very, very well, you know. And the kingdom has done, and you mentioned it in the last panel already, but you cannot thank the kingdom enough for it, because it actually did not put enough effort on the exploration side. But this now, it's accelerated, and the law also is helping that. That's fantastic, you know. And also through the establishment of a service company, professionalizing this. So this is all very, very good. And I want to add two things to it. The one thing is, and this is important here in this panel here, don't think about it, you have to be integrated in all steps along the value chain. Obviously that would be great, you know, but you can also pick out those elements in the value chain that are particularly attractive. So for instance, on copper, you know, you might not have enough copper ore in the kingdom. We don't know that yet, but there is a lot of copper in the neighboring places, and we have logistics. With we, I mean Saudi has logistics. We can bring it here, and we have one other thing for the downstream side. We have energy. Energy like nobody else has it. Like nobody else has it. And we have, again, a logistic advantage if we want to ship it out to Asia, to the large areas of demand, right? Asia, China, or Europe, you know? That's it. And think about it, and we have the infrastructure. And let me add one other thing that many other countries don't have, and that I heard also from people who came visiting here. We actually have a qualified labor force. And that has been built up over the last 30, 40 years through companies like Aramco, like SABIC, like Ma'aden, and like many private industries, having put enormous efforts into educating the young Saudis. So all of this exists here. That's fantastic. Last point on the Vice Minister's point, who's very interested in the downstream. The downstream is very different from the upstream. And I would basically, I split Alcoa into Alcoa and Arconic for the reason that we could go into it for a whole host of reasons, but this requires a totally different skill set. At the same time, we haven't really started with this here in the kingdom. You know, on the aluminum side, we have built at the time a packaging rolling mill and an aerospace an automotive rolling mill. But it's just started. And we can use completely different advantages. So we can make this a hub, you know, so I'm extremely excited.
Thank you very much, Klaus. So I think that brings us more or less to the end of the panel. I'd just like to make one or two final remarks. The one is, and it's been mentioned this morning by the minister, and that is the fact that Saudi Arabia sits in this middle of this region between Africa and Asia and Europe. That's the first point. So geographically, it's very well positioned. But also you look at things geopolitically, issues between China and the US, Russia and Ukraine. I mean, this is an oasis in the sense of peace in globally at the moment.
Peter, may I add to this, which I found really interesting, you know, because I talked to 3 ministers from different countries here, all coming from the African countries, and they mentioned one additional point. They said, you have political stability. So if we come here, you know, you have clear laws, and we can count on this, you know, and they have a different reference system than we sometimes have, you know. So.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for being here. Could I, yes, please, Vice Minister. Yeah.
Okay, just for a last comment, if just to mention, is really very important to have action from that very important panel, actually. Listening to investors is very important. What Mr. Khaled has mentioned, was Klaus saying, listen to investors, it's very important to get things through. And that's why really we need to have one single point of reference of doing anything in mining, as we have done with the Royal Commission Jebel Yumbu. It was regulatory and infrastructure point of reference for petrochemical industry. We need the similar to it to be the mining industry also. Also having a competitive raw material, as Klaus has said, is very important to be competitive. Otherwise, we will never go and have a downstream or any basic industry. And last but not least, we need to have an anchor national company invest to show the investor the seriousness of Saudi Arabia and that investment. This is what I have as an action for that panel.
Thank you very much. That's a very great conclusion. Well, thank you very much. Can I ask you to thank the panel for their excellent contribution? Thank you.